glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence.
The argument of violence in video games has been going on a long time. The first time the media really picked up and started talking about it was with Mortal Kombat, Doom, and Wolfenstein. Unlike these video games, other video games have evolved into better graphics, better sound design. In 1992, Wolfenstein and Doom came under scrutiny because of the violence depicted in the game. This is also true for Mortal Kombat. But because of its popularity, the media took notice. The media told parents that the violence in Mortal Kombat would lead their children to be more violent and more likely to go into criminal activity. For example, a 1992 ABC News report shows decapitation and warns parents about violence in real life.
This is called Mortal Kombat. The objective is to finish off your opponent violently. Another method is decapitation. Critics, including the National PTA, say such video games contribute to violence in real life.
In 1999, a mass shooting occurred in Columbine High School. It was discovered that the shooters played a violent video game, Doom. This time, in addition to the media, the government blamed violent video games. The FBI conducted a study about the effects of violent video games. The report was misleading and made conflicting claims. At first, the FBI blamed a variety of media influences. The student demonstrates an unusual fascination with movies, TV shows, computer games, music videos, or printed material that focus intensely on themes of violence, hatred, control, power, death, and destruction. Eventually, they narrowed their focus on violent computer games. Students are able to use school computers to play violent computer games or to explore inappropriate websites such as those that promote violent hate groups or give instructions for bomb making. The FBI's methodology was suspicious. They contacted the PTA, the Parent Teachers Association, which, as the name implies, was made up of parents and teachers, not scientists and medical professionals, who have conducted studies about the effects of violent video games on a kid's mind. Following the FBI report, the American Psychological Association, or APA, conducted a study in an article titled Much Ado About Nothing, the Misestimation and Overinterpretation of Violent Video Game Effects in Eastern and Western Nations. They point out that while sales of violent video games were rising, incidents of youth violence were declining. In 2012, yet another mass shooting happened in Sandy Hook. Even though the APA found no correlation between mass shootings and violent video games, the public continued to insist that they were to blame. Even Donald Trump, who would be president 4 years later, tweeted, "Video game violence and glorification must be stopped. It is creating monsters." In 2019, after the El Paso shooting, Walmart took down all advertising for violent video games, even though it was left up to the stores. They still sold violent video games and guns. As we have seen, Donald Trump and Walmart still believe that violent video games cause criminal activity. This can be seen in the Fox News report in 2018 after the Parkland shooting.
And Ben, what I always think about this is, with science or not, for young children to continually see images of heads exploding, chests opening up, you talked about the immorality of all of this. Whether it's constitutional or not constitutional, maybe as a society we have to talk about what numbing ourselves to this very graphic violence. It's not like cartoon. This looks like a real person's head exploding. And it's over and over and over again. And you're doing it 10 hours a day, and you're playing with people in other countries. That's where you're getting your stimulation.
Laura Ingraham talks about how she wants the government to ban violent video games. This would impede our First Amendment rights, the right to free speech. Laura Ingraham is also the person who doesn't want the government to impede our Second Amendment rights, the rights to bear arms. This is a good example of a bias in a study and how it can affect how people perceive violent video games. As said by the Oxford University, our findings suggest that researchers' bias might have influenced previous studies on this topic and have distorted our understanding of the effects of video games, says co-author Dr. Nita Weinstein from Cardiff University. An important step taken in this study was pre-registration, where the researchers publicly registered their hypothesis, methods, and analysis techniques prior to beginning the research. The idea that violent video games drive real-world aggression is a popular one, but it hasn't tested very well over time, says lead researcher Professor Andrew, Director of Research at Oxford Internet Institute. Despite interest in the topic by parents and policymakers, the research has not demonstrated that there is cause for concern. Misinformation can lead people like Laura Ingraham to going up against the U.S. Constitution. I was able to get an interview with Paul Nims about the effects of violent video games and his job as
program supervisor for BJC Behavioral Health. I'm a counselor, a therapist. I have a master's degree in counseling and licensed professional counselor, certified co-occurring disorders professional, and certified substance abuse counselor. I do. I play some video games. I don't play a lot anymore, but I used to play quite a bit. I believe that violent video games do have an impact on individuals' minds and their behavior. The American Psychiatric Association has done lots of meta research, and they have found from their meta research that there is a lot of increased aggression with individuals who play a significant amount of violent video games. No, I think moderation is really the answer. A person can't play violent video games for hours on end and not have an impact on their emotional state.
In both the APA and Oxford studies, it says that violent video games lead to an increase of aggressive behavior, not criminal activity. Also, they both say that more research needs to be done. The APA mentions that violent video games have different effects on different people. I did interview someone about this. While he is not a scientist, he does give good examples on how violent video games can affect different people.
Overall, that's a good 21 years of my life where video games have been a very big part and played a very lot of difference in my free time. I currently work for a video game bar called Up Down. This is a road stop on the way to someone deciding to just kill a bunch of people. I don't think that it is the cause of mass shootings at all. I think that a lot of people will try to find a way to either vent or just, relax or find a way to cure their anxiety, or, there are a lot of different ways that you can use video games, and some people do have, their own problems, either mentally or physically or whatever's going on, and video games is a way that they can potentially let off that steam. Or so other games are meant for certain people, depending on their background, depending on where they've lived, who they were raised by, and all these other different factors. And so, for an example, someone that is angry, or being bullied at school, or whatever else they have going on in their brain, they decide to play Call of Duty, but they've never played Call of Duty before. But they want to let off steam. Let's play some Call of Duty. They get on multiplayer, on almost every multiplayer in Call of Duty. If you're new to Call of Duty, you're not going to do well. And immediately discerning that toward, oh, I'm bad at all video games. Oh, it's not going to help me at all. Oh, I should go kill some people. It just doesn't make any sense. That you have to find the right game for you to blow off steam.
As I've been talking about, violence in video games is a really tricky subject. It has been subtracting from the actual argument, which is gun control. This has also happened with Dungeons and Dragons, where it was used as a way of subtracting from other arguments by saying that Dungeons and Dragons influence kids to do bad stuff. This argument has been happening for ages, just with new technology of the time. One example is when Plato thought books were going to make people stupid.